in my heart, what I believe is if democracy means the toleration of genocide in service of apartheid, then I, as a Black American, as a child of American apartheid, I have no use in any sort of project that argues for that.
I don't want to dilly-dally with a long intro because I'm interviewing Ta-Nehisi Coates, journalist and blockbuster best-selling author of Between the World and Me and The Message. And our conversation was so much more wide-ranging than I could have ever planned for. We talked about Palestine, we talked about incarceration, we talked about racism, we talked about Shakespeare. But the dynamic, the back and forth, it was alive. There were a lot of times where I was the one who was put on the spot, and it was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Downstream as much as I did. Ta-Nehisi Coates, thank you so much for joining us on Downstream.
Thanks for having me.
We were having a lively discussion before the camera started rolling. Very, very quickly, who's been the better exporter of racism over the century?
Yeah.
America.
Okay, so you know what? I was just sitting here thinking, so I'm going to amend what I said about France, because I'm sure there's some French friends who would pull out, some of my Algerian people who will probably, or Moroccan people will probably pull something out. Having said that, I am fairly confident that in terms of footprint and exploitation of racism, America is peerless.
I mean, I'm sorry, right? As a Brit, we originated
some of this stuff. Of course. I mean, we are a byproduct of the UK.
You wouldn't have but here's the Virginia difference. Slave codes without us. Thank you very much.
We appreciate it. I wouldn't be here without them. But I will say that there becomes a point where the child outdoes the parent. And I think we're at that point. If only because of the sheer size of what the United States is. That's the first thing, the sheer size of it. The fact that it's pop culture is a huge export, and it outdoes other countries in terms of its pop. The amount of space we take up, the amount of oxygen, we take up in the world, which is something that I have to tell you, I wasn't conscious of until, relatively recently in my life, because I became a late traveler. And so just like I can be anywhere in the world and hear, Sam Cooke or Wu-Tang Clan or anything, or be in the most unlikely places and see somebody make a reference to Angela Davis or Malcolm X. By the same token, these are the positive things, but the bad things, I mean, I'm always shocked. When I was researching for The Message, it amazed me how many times that the analog for what the plan of Zionism was relied on what happened with Native Americans and the indigenous people in the continent. And I am not saying this Ta-Nehisi Coates, I'm not drawing that analogy. The founders of Zionism and the founders of Israel, they made that analogy very explicit. America's supporters made that analogy very, very, explicit. I think I put this in this book, but I if I didn't, I've definitely written about it before. When Hitler was researching, the Nuremberg codes and how to enact it, he sent agents into the South, in America, into the Jim Crow South, to figure out, to study, how best to do it. So here we have our fingerprints on the Holocaust, right? Okay. And, on the Nuremberg laws, like our fingerprints are there, which is a white supremacist crime. Let's be very clear about that. You know what I mean? It is a racist white supremacist crime. And then we have our fingerprints on the thing that came out of it too. When you got it coming and going, I mean, you're doing a bang up job.
Well, look, while I may concede that the students surpass the master in this one regard, you can also see the thumbprints of British history all over Palestine as well. The Black and Tans, who are basically a military death squad operating in Ireland, doing the same thing in Palestine. And that's also part of the reason why there's such a strong sense of solidarity between the Irish and Palestinians.
So we're going to have a racism off here.
Oh, we're going to have a racism off. And by the end of it, there's a few things which I will stick up for poor benighted Britain on, right?
Yeah.
We do football better than anybody else, and we do racism better than anybody else. And I will die on that hill. But so the first word.
What's your mass incarceration like?
Oh, okay. Well, it's worst. It's the worst in Western Europe.
See, you're not on our
No.
level.
Yeah, but that's because we don't have as many people. We're a smaller island.
I bet proportionally we got you beat too.
Okay,
I bet you we don't just have you beat you in size.
The disproportionality of black people in society versus in our criminal justice system is worse here than it is in America.
That can't be true.
It's true. It's true.
All right, I'll accept it.
All right,
I'll allow it.
I think there's a bit of statistical finicking involved in getting there.
What about the proportionality of citizens, period, in the carceral system? Because while you may, like, I would make the case that you cannot have mass incarceration in America at all without white supremacy. That it itself is a ghost of it. So even as we have white people suffering, we have Hispanics who are a larger, minority at this point in America suffering. They wouldn't even think about it if it wasn't for black folks.
I think that's true. And there's the Michelle Alexander argument with the new Jim Crow, that this is an extension of the sort of tools of social control and oppression going from slavery through the Reconstruction period into mass incarceration. And the history for us is different. The idea of a state-run jail system, it comes from a different history for us. And I think maybe the interesting thing for us is the ways in which colonial policing that because we had a nice distinction for a long time. We said, we've got bobbies on the beat here, and yes, they'll crack your son's head in every so often, and yes, they'll do some awful things to working class white people, but you're never going to be subject to colonial style policing. And then those lines start to blur and blur and blur. And of course
and what is it that like when you differentiate that between colonial, like as the argument goes, what is colonial style? So
one big distinction would be the sorts of tools which are used. So we used water cannon and live rounds, live ammunition in Ireland and elsewhere. It was quite a big deal to want to bring water cannon here domestically on to English streets. I think that the use of internment that happened in Ireland doesn't happen here. I mean, I guess for us, the thing is that it's less defined by white supremacy so much as it is defined by the very specific shape of British colonialism, which begins with Ireland.
You're right. I'm going to tell you why you're right. Okay. All right.
Oh my God.
You're right. So there's this great book by this woman, Carolyn Elkins, which I actually read for the message too. I don't know if I actually shouted her out, but A Legacy of Violence. And it is brutal. Like it just, and it's everything. It's India, it's Palestine, it's everything. And so and it's only like recent colonial violence. By recent, I mean like the past couple centuries. It's not like the totality of colonial violence. It doesn't go back to, say, the founding of the colonies in America. For instance. Okay, if you roll that in, you roll Australia in. I mean, was South Africa part of the Commonwealth at one point?
Well, so we had the Boer War where we invented the concentration camp. Yeah.
Okay. So right. So you roll that in, you take all of that in, and I think Cecil Rhodes, British.
One of ours.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
We win.
You win. No, you win. It's crazy how much you win too.
Win.
No, you win by a mile. You win by a mile. So you start if you add. You win. You win. Now we are a healthy descendant of that, and we're trying to pick up the torch, and we're trying to compete. But no, I think on a historical, in terms of world impact, there just is no.
See, this is why in Hollywood all the villains have English accents. It's because we're the originator.
Right.
So the first word in Between the World and Me is sun. The first word.
Wait, why don't the French win though?
Okay,
so the French have Haiti.
They've got Haiti, they've
Algeria,
got
North Africa.
the nuclear testing in the Pacific. That's pretty bad.
Christ.
It's pretty bad. The Sétif massacre, the massacre in Paris. I can't remember if it was 61 or 63, something like that.
The British win just because they had the bigger empire, right? Isn't that why?
Yeah,
ultimately...
that's the thing. Boats.
Yeah, boats. We win because of the boats.
we had boats.
Right. Okay, all right, you got it. I'm in the font of it. I'm in the heart.
And that's why. Look, that's not why Napoleon in the end couldn't make the continental system work.
Right.
We were too good at breaking that blockade. And that's also kind of one of the only reasons why we wanted to abolish the slave trade, was to really fuck over the French.
Wow. I can't believe y'all win.
We win.
You do. You do. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Right. The first word in Between the World and Me is Son. The first word in the message is comrades.
Yeah.
Is this the beginnings of a Marxist turn that I can detect, or am I getting too hopeful?
No, I mean, I can just give you a quick explanation of that. You know, my dad, he was, so I guess there's a little bit of Marxism in this. My dad was in the Panther Party. And comrade was the term they always used. And like first place, that was the first place I heard it, reading about it there. Obviously it's, used all the time, in Marxist and communist spaces. But I tried to find a word that was better than that, and I couldn't.
And what does it mean for you?
That's a great question. It means that we are together in a struggle. Like we are united in a kind of struggle. And it's more than friend. And in some ways it's more than brother or sister. It's gender neutral. You know what I mean? Like it applies across the board. It says you and I are together in this, not just struggle, like in this deep, profound thing. There is an internationalism about it that I like. You know what I mean? That obviously is, in the message itself. It says that we are together in something, and this is just in my mind, no matter where we are in space and time. You know what I mean? So for me, it links me to people that, came before me. It links me to people who come after me. But probably the biggest thing is the abolition of the state as a line in struggle, which was obviously very, very important, for that book. And I'm certainly not trying to, deny it's class links, which are there too, but in terms of why I ultimately picked it for this book, and we went through a bunch, like, it's interesting you picked up on that, because we went through a bunch of, should it be this, should it be that, should it be?
What were the also rounds?
I don't know. Kids, students, guys. The funny thing is, though, I have
ragazzi.
Yeah, right. Right. But if I'm honest about it, I have old emails that I was sending my class, and it's comrades. I don't know why.
Have you read the Jodie Dean book called Comrade?
No.
No. A bunch of me and my friends read it together when we were trying to think about what's our political relationship together. Because we're people who've all, we are friends. I'm married to one of them. We've got deep personal relationships, but we met through politics, and we were trying to think about, well, what is that political relationship?
Yeah.
And how do we not just sort of, slump into a life of like dinner at your house, dinner at my house, and how do you preserve that sense of holding each other accountable politically? And the word comrade and the idea of comradeship and cultivating it.
I think you kind of said it better than me. Because it's kind of this abolition of the lines between the personal and the political. Which has never been true in my life, ever. And so like that, even kind of what you just said about holding, each other accountable, that we are accountable to each other, that again, we are united in something. We have deep, deep personal relationships, definitely, but that's not, it's not, we're just friends.
Yeah, I don't just go around to your house and chitter-chatter for the rest
of
my life.
That's not what we do. No, that's not what we do. And I don't really have, at this point in my life, apolitical friendships. And some might say that is impoverishing, but I don't think it is. I think it's deeply enriching, actually. Yeah, I was trying to think. I have people who I talk about politics more than others, but I don't have deep friends or even friends who maybe secretly think Trump is great. Yeah, I don't have. There are people who think you should have that, and I'm not one of them.
I don't know. I think that it's not so much with my friends, because obviously you choose your friends, but the relationships I don't choose pull me into proximity with people who think very, very differently from me.
Well, yeah, of course, I have that. I have that, but they're not people who I would call comrade at all, or even friend.
I like the challenge of trying to think about what would it mean for me to feel that they were my comrade, even though they feel very differently about someone like Nigel Farage, right? What would it mean for us to feel a sense of political purpose together?
Well, they would have to feel differently about Nigel Farage, right?
Maybe, or maybe the 90% of other stuff, hating inequality, hating what's been done to this country's working class. Right. Maybe you raise the salience of all that. you forget that we feel very differently about immigration. And maybe after all that, you don't like Nigel Farage so much. But
Okay,
how
but
do I make it
I
not a
want to. I
sticking
actually want to
point?
drill down on that,
All right,
right?
go on.
And you can probably educate me on the British model of that. So let me take the American, because we're kind of going through the same thing right now. Everything you just named, you know what I mean, in terms of, you know, feeling a kind of class solidarity, you know, a sense that there is a baseline through which humanity should never descend, that, you know, people shouldn't have to, you know, worry about, you know, making a living, healthcare, you know what I mean? Their basic needs, that these things should not be subject to profit, that they should have the right as workers to improve their lot and to negotiate their lot, and et cetera. I guess the reason why that's important to me are basic issues of justice. In other words, like, there's something beneath the material for me that is a basic ethic. And the fact that you would see it as wrong maybe to do to people who are economically exploited, but, and I'm not saying you, I'm using the royal you, obviously.
The vous.
The vous, right? The vous. We're gonna vous, yes. The vous. The fact that vous, le fait de vous penser. No, I'm joking. The fact that you think that the royal you would think that it's okay. What is your ultimate, like, commitment then? Because what you're saying is, a group that I do not belong to, it's okay to do something to them.
So here's the thing, right? Is that where I've been coming from, and I've changed a lot on this.
Yeah.
I've changed a lot on this, and I've had my years of really feeling the Stuart Hall thing of race as the modality through which classes lived, and I still think, of course, that the working class is not homogenous, and especially the working class is not homogenous. But there are a lot of white people in this country, right? This is still a 84% white country, and a lot of people don't live in cities like me. I've got family members who are white, didn't go to uni, still live in their small town, which has been completely fucked by deindustrialization. And I can tell you that they feel so differently about immigration than me.
Yeah.
So differently. And for the longest time, immigration for me was probably the most important thing, because, and I still think this is true, what happens to the immigrant today happens to the white working class guy tomorrow.
Yes.
Right? However, if I pick that fight, I'm going to lose.
Right.
And I'm going to lose with so many of these white working class individuals who have been screwed over, feel really, really angry, and just like me, want to burn everything down.
Right.
So for me, it's going, all right, how do I cultivate and how do I build a shared project, a shared language, and a shared worldview with you on all these things? And hopefully immigration becomes less important.
Okay, so I have two questions for that. The first is that like, the easiest thing I would say is, in America, I don't even know if we've picked it. It's that it's being picked with us. And so the question is not so much, do we go out and have a fight, as do we defend or not?
Yes.
So, like, I like, if you want to say, for instance, you know, I just had this conversation. I'm a writer. I'm not a politician. Do I think, like, if you're running for office and you're trying to, you know, build a mass movement that's going to do I think you need to go out and yell open borders? I mean, I can understand why you would not, right? But when people are attacked, the deeper question for me is, do you defend them, though?
I think this is something which is really interesting, and it goes maybe to a question which is less writerly and is more about what kind of political organization are you doing. If you're contesting elections, you basically have to triangulate around the shape of the electorate you've got in some way. But if you're not contesting elections, you're doing the work that is comparable with, say, the Workers' Party in Belgium. I think you can draw parallels to the Black Panthers as well, where you're thinking about, I guess, base building. Right? How do we build these institutions which connect people in the way we want them to be connected and build power outside of elections? Then maybe you don't triangulate and you do defend with those. So maybe there's a difference, right? What kind of politics are you doing? And then I think that there's something here, and this is maybe something which I could throw back to you, because you know.
Wait, but I have to ask my second question too.
Oh, wait. But
okay,
it's about
go ahead.
representation, right?
Okay,
it's about representation. Who do people think something is for?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that ultimately, I'm happier with there being a bald white guy with a regional accent saying the rad shit than me going, well, it has to have someone who looks like me on it. Actually, it's probably better if it doesn't look like me.
Yeah, I'm pretty good with that too. I guess the thing I would say though is, well, I want to talk about this triangulation point because that is difficult for me because, again, in the American context, and I won't, make pronouncements about here, Black people have historically been the triangulated against.
Yeah.
Much of the movement that, I think a lot of people, see as, inspirational and whatever, from the Panthers themselves, to, the civil rights movement, all the way back to Frederick Douglass. I mean, we were basically being triangulated against, right up through, Clinton and Sister Soldier, all of that. America got, to the extent that it got, many of the policies that I think a lot of us would applaud. Its New Deal policy, its FHA loans, all of that, all the stuff I wrote about in the case for reparations. That was largely achieved by cutting Black people out. So I guess it's probably part of the reason, like in my bones, it's very hard for me to support that, because then I would have to look back and say, my grandmother, who raised 3 daughters in the projects, and scrubbed floors and cobbled together enough money at last to buy a home, but was only able to do it through the exploitative means that was not put upon white people and was not eligible for the kind of loan that I would have to say, well, that's the cost of doing business. I can't do that.
I completely understand that. And I suppose it's about where you put some of your focus. A classic one might be, in our context, we've got this thing called no recourse to public funds. So no recourse to public funds means that if you've immigrated here recently, if you're an asylum seeker here, and it was only when I was a kid this policy got brought in, so it's relatively new, that you can't get access to state programs.
Right.
And this was brought in because there was a big asylum seeker moral panic, very similar to what we've got now. And Tony Blair, a centre-left politician, brought it in. And I want to overturn no recourse to public funds because I see what it's doing to asylum seekers, and I think it's awful. If that is the fight that we pick as an electoral issue right now, we're going to lose it, and we're going to lose it hard.
Right.
However, if instead I go, all right, well, what's a fight that a left-wing electoral vehicle could fight right now?
Right.
And it's the widening of collective bargaining rights.
Right.
And instead we're going, all right, so you might have seen, like, you've been staying in London, all of the food delivery riders.
I haven't. I just got here yesterday.
Okay, well, you're gonna see them. Like, one of them, their electric bikes is gonna go past your ear, and you're gonna go, Jesus. And then the smell of pizza just sort of like follows in its wake. This is a job that would not exist without a hyper-exploitable class of immigrant worker.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Would not exist. Could not exist.
Yes.
And the weakening of collective bargaining rights have completely fucked white working class people over as well. Yes. So do I want to pick the fight, which, yes, would make life really different for asylum seekers, but quite frankly, a smaller number of people, or the bigger universal one, which is going to scoop up a lot of, grey economy workers who are predominantly immigrants, many of whom are undocumented, up along with it? Probably that's the one I want to go for. Yeah, no,
let's differentiate between two things. For instance, just a reference, I wrote the case for reparations. Do I think left-wing people running for office should, run on the things? And I would expand this probably beyond the case for reparations. Other things I don't think the things that I write on, obviously, I think they're good for society. But if you're running for elective office, no. My job is to affect the culture around electoral politics. That's my job in politics, right? It's not to, provide a platform. And so I would agree with that. I would differentiate that, what is offensive, in terms of what you describe as picking a fight, and what is defensive, right? Which is people are being attacked. Do you not say anything? And to take it to the book, nowhere at this moment in America is that more crucial than in Palestine, because there is strong pressure, not just not to have the fight on the West Bank, on Gaza, on apartheid, but to not even defend, and there are people who will tell you right now, that in terms of building any sort of coalition, in terms of building any sort of base, in terms of how, any sort of, movement can actually happen to end, what is going on right now, y'all shouldn't be talking about this.
I mean, I suppose it depends what your perspective is, right? And so I come at this from the perspective of someone who's on the very far left,
Mhm.
all right? When I was a teenager, I'd take people on dates to the Karl Marx grave.
Right,
Like,
right.
it didn't go well.
Right.
It did not go well. But I think that there's a case to say that it is not only a moral imperative, it is a moral imperative, but there's also a strategic case to be made to go hard on Palestine, because that takes you to the heart of so many things. It takes you to the heart of the arms industry and the arms trade. It takes you to the heart of decades and decades of imperialist American foreign policy and British foreign policy. It takes you to the heart of the wider project of the war on terror, the devaluing of Muslim life. It takes you to the heart of, especially in the UK, part of the way in which this has had electoral consequences here. It is spoken to and animated, I think, a sense of, amongst many Muslims in this country, that whether it's cost of living or continued arms sales to Israel, this is not a country that cares about Muslim life, and you cannot just bank on us to obediently go off to the ballot box and vote for Labour every time. I think that you can say, actually, there are strategic reasons to domestically blow this thing wide open.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak on here, but I know that in America, because Zionism is such a bipartisan project at this point, you are igniting a civil war within the Democratic Party. Now, look, I wrote what I wrote, man. You know what I mean? And I wrote it during the Democratic Convention. So, like, where I feel on this and my clarity on this is not my clarity. I wouldn't say that. I don't want to overinflate. My perspective on this, though, is pretty direct and pretty clear. But I guess where I differ is that the Black movement, and now even this movement in this country, it's always been inconvenient in America for the broader, left project. And people often draw on us and on our struggles after those struggles are done, when the moral authority is there. But in the moment, let me add something else too. There is a
who's interviewing who?
I don't know. Should I shut up? I'll
No,
shut
no,
up.
no,
I'll
no,
stop.
no,
If you
go
want
for
to,
it, go for it.
I can stop wherever you want me to stop.
Go for it. This is great. I've got some questions that I definitely want to ask.
Yeah. I mean, I just think this is like really crucial, because I think, like, I have been in fierce arguments with people, and that's probably what you're getting right now, where they have said to me, listen, I agree with you about everything you're saying about Gaza being a genocide, about apartheid, everything. But we're talking about a variety of issues, not just one. And you are telling me that, you should be able, Ta-Nehisi, you should be able to jump up and yell about this, but you're risking democracy itself in America for this. And my perspective is, it's hard to say, but in my heart, what I believe is, if democracy means the toleration of genocide in service of apartheid, then I, as a Black American, as a child of American apartheid, I have no use in any sort of project that argues for that.
I completely agree with you. Me and you are like this on this issue.
Yes. But hold on, before you answer, I just want to push you a little bit more on that.
Yeah.
And I don't know this history, right? So you would know this better than me. I guess what I would ask you is, do the immigration arguments begin here? Or are they, like Palestine, not separable to broader things that the UK has done around the world?
I think they're completely bound up with other things that the UK has done around the world. I suppose what I've got a strategic view,
and then I'm gonna stop.
Which is I think people are gonna love it. I mean, I'm loving it anyway. But like, for me, what's really important is, like, so my brother-in-law is a really different kind of guy from me, right? He didn't go to uni. He works in a factory. near Huddersfield. It's one of the few jobs of its kind left. It's a unionized skilled machinist job, right? And he's white, so that's another very big difference. It is so important to me that we realize that the gap between him and me, however big it may feel because I live in London, he doesn't, I went to uni, he didn't, we've got very different feelings about immigration, that gap is smaller than the gap between him and Elon Musk, or the gap between him and Nigel Farage. And so I suppose that's where I'm coming from. It's not about saying, let's throw the immigration stuff out the window. It's going, how do we identify the political struggles that bring me and my brother-in-law into comradeship with one another? As opposed to saying, well, if we feel differently about this immigration thing, you go over there with the billionaires and the millionaires and the white nationalists. Do you see what I mean?
I do. And like, not only do I see what you mean, I don't think we really have a choice. Like, let's be clear about this. Like, at the end of the day, there has to be some sort of broad, there is no go for self. You know what I mean? That's not a political option, right? I guess but at the same time, I want us to see it clearly. And so again, and I wonder whether you have this here. Our big problem is that in America, Black identity is not, I would say it's twofold. It is ethnic, right? And so some of that plays into the representation thing that you were talking about before. But it is also racial in a very specific sense. So what do I mean by that? I mean that anti-Black racism has effectively become a kind of another segmentation of class. So in America, like what it is to be Black working class and what it is to be white working, like they're not, they are, and there's tons of academic research on this. I mean, I did it in the case for reparations. But for instance, the story I just told you about my grandmother, right? Which is, a story that, you could, tell about a lot of, poor white people, right? In America. The problem is they would have had access to those loans and my grandmother didn't.
Yeah.
So what that means, and that was like 70 years ago, okay? So what that means is that there's been wealth that's accrued, not to make them Elon Musk, I'm gonna be really clear, or anything close to that. Like, that's not what I mean. But I mean that race is a very real material interest in America, the project of mass incarceration, right? And I don't think this works out for anybody, but I wanna be very clear about this. Like, we have to acknowledge that one group of people ends up being the prisoners and the other group ends up being the prison guards. And what you would say to me is those two groups of people have more in common than Elon Musk or any, person of that class. And I agree with that. But I think we got to see that clearly.
I think, I think that there are things which don't exist in the same way in this country, right? We didn't have redlining in this country, whilst you obviously have had huge informal in discrimination when it comes to...
Did you have anything like it? Like, is there any sort of systemic thing like that?
Not de jure segregation.
Did you have de jure Jim Crow at all here?
Not here. I mean, like in Ireland.
Of course, right.
Yes. In terms of what Irish people could buy, how much they could own, the value of that was part of the penal laws, I think they were called. And you had those laws in the colonies, but in terms of what was here, like on the Great British, mainland.
So what you're saying is we are more racist than you.
Oh.
Sorry, go ahead. I had to sneak that in. Go ahead.
So mad right now.
Sorry, go ahead.
But no, we didn't have that kind of de jure segregation. We had de facto segregation in lots of ways, but not de jure segregation. I wonder if I can move us to something which is related.
Sure, of course.
And it goes to the book where you say politics is the art of the possible, but art creates the possible of politics. A policy of welfare reform exists downstream from the myth of the welfare queen. And I want to prod you with something. Please. And see how you react to it.
Please.
Could this be a little bit of when you are from an arts and humanities background and you're steeped in the academy and you're still spending a lot of time in universities, there's a tendency to see everything as discourses being the product of other discourses. It's a bit talking about talking. And so one emphasizes the continuity of stories as opposed to maybe some more, material or political and economic factors?
No, not at all. No, and I know because just to so I have been a writer almost all my life, and I've been a professional writer for almost 30 years now. And only in the last 10 years have I been somebody that spent a ton of time in the academy. But perhaps more importantly than that, my notions of the relationship between art and politics don't begin there. They begin, as a child, and my parents playing The Last Poets, and my parents playing Gil Scott-Heron, and me playing Public Enemy, and it is a popular sense, for what art does in politics. I think all people have art. I think it's like just a basic, gathering around, the fire, telling stories. It doesn't have to be, books. It doesn't, all the awards, all the theory and all of that. That is not what I mean. I mean art in its most basic folk sense. You know what I mean? And I think the question that I tried to answer in this book is the why. Why do it? Why do it? And I wanted to answer it in two ways. I wanted to answer it from the perspective of movements, but to be honest with you, it was actually more interesting to me from the perspective of power. Why does power require stories? I have enough guns, I can rob you. Why don't I just rob you? Why? If you think about it, why do I even need racism? And by racism, I mean the theories of it. Why don't I just go to Africa, buy slaves, create a system in which all of their children are enslaved, and that's it? Why do I have to explain it? Seriously, why do I need
why?
Yeah, why? This is the hopeful part. Because I believe somewhere in our base, maybe even lizard brain, there is a part of us that says this is wrong. This is wrong. And it has to be justified. And the way it is justified is through story. And the story does not have to be, some, book that everybody reads, Why does blackface, at its height become America's, or one of its most popular art forms? Why would that be? Why would that be? Is there no relationship between that and the fact of, segregation? Why, blackface goes back before that, but enslavement and the fact that enslavement is also at the root of the country. Why? I think the problem is it is very hard to find people perpetrating systems of oppression and not find some sort of cultural representation that tries to say that that's okay. It feels necessary. It feels like almost a law of physics that the two have to, work together. I don't think that diminishes the fact of material deprivation and what it is, but I would argue to you that it's all material. That, that blackface is itself material, that you can't really have the fact of lynching without it. You know what I mean? That when you have made me feel that I am lesser than, because of the shape of my lips, because of the shape of my nose, because of the king, that you have materially affected me. Because what is material for? What are resources ultimately for? What are we doing with those ultimately?
I suppose I do very much accept the connection between blackface and lynching. And I do accept the relationship between welfare reforms, by which we mean tightening welfare policies, and the racialized, racist figure of the welfare queen. I accept that these are related, and I accept that these degraded, abject, demonizing imaginaries allow you to do this thing in politics. But I suppose when I think about welfare reforms, there are stories that we can tell in this country as well to do with chavs, benefits cheats, where we say, all this paves the way for the horrible austerity that we've experienced in 14 years. But maybe there's this bigger picture of, well, you don't have actually existing communism anymore to discipline capitalist states.
Yes, I think that's a huge deal.
Social democracy collapses, collective bargaining is weakened.
Yes.
And is there maybe a tendency amongst writers that we want to see things in terms of the story and the images and those continuities, and we find it more difficult to step back and go, oh, well, maybe that was maybe the collapse of the Soviet Union was a really big deal for welfare provision.
So I don't think like the art is a tool. The art is not a causal factor. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Sure.
It's not as though people come up and write things and then therefore material things happen.
We said it's downstream from the myth of the welfare queen.
Yes, I do. In other words, what I mean is that without the belief system, you couldn't do the thing. You know, but I don't mean that the myth of the welfare queen has to be created. And so, like, I don't think it just arises mystically in people's heads, you know? But I do think that you can't actually do the welfare reform without the myth. So if I were to lay out how this process goes, you want to rob somebody. That's the first thing. You want to rob them. Let's be very clear about it. You want to rob them. You know what I mean? You usually go to do it or make some sort of attempt to do it. And to cover it up, you create a story. And I think that is inescapable.
I mean, you talk about that in Baltimore, which is I can't help but do it in a London accent, so I'm very sorry.
How do you say it?
Like, let me see your bike. or like, come, let me see your phone. That's how we would say it if we were robbing.
That doesn't sound very threatening.
It's like, oh no, it's actually terrifying because it's
really?
also when someone says it so nicely, you know you're fucked.
Oh Jesus, they don't say it nice in America.
No, someone would come up to you really nice and be like, if someone asks you what the time is, don't give it to them.
Right.
I was going like, what time is it, mate? You're getting robbed.
Right.
You're just like, you're straight up getting robbed.
Right.
But you say like, why do they need that story? They can just steal your fucking bike.
I could just do it, right? I could just do it. And I think that's, I think there's a root cause for it. I mean, does not capitalism itself create any number of stories? And like, why do people go for Trump? Like, I don't think Trump is understandable without story. I don't think he's understandable without, crypto and this whole thing about, being a wagey versus being a boss. I mean, these people are telling stories. You know what I mean? Like this notion that it is somehow more...
Can you imagine Karl Marx hearing that and being like, you've taken the wrong conclusion.
Right. But I mean, like, just this idea that like you are somehow better or more manly because you are taking what little money you have and essentially gambling it. And the house always wins, right? But there is a dialogue, a series of stories of, and not just stories, but symbols, you know what I mean? Like symbols and ideas, you know what I mean? That make people feel a certain way. And I really want to drill down on this notion that what we sometimes see as a kind of soft racism or bigotry or whatever really is physical. I mean, I was trying to make that point in Between the World and Me, that it's Black people in America are more stressed, right? We just are more stressed. You know what I mean? And you will go to the doctor. The doctor will be very clear with you. Like, you have a heart attack, you need to avoid stressful situations, right? It's hard to demonstrate materially what stress is, right? Like, it's very hard to actually, dictate what that is. But the factor of it, you can control for wealth, you can control for everything. And you will look at us at the end of the day and our life expectancy is shorter. You know what I mean? That is a real thing. You know what I mean? That is a very, very, very real thing. And if you live in a society where people continually degrade you because of who you are, and you're surrounded by people who themselves are equally degraded, and your mother and your father and your grandmother and your they're all in the same boat. I mean, I think that tends to have some very, very real material effects. And so I am, first of all, I don't like putting these things in competition because in my mind, they're not, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's the first thing, you know what I mean? But the second thing is, I just think, and maybe this takes us back to where you started with your immigration conversation, because I guess where I would push you is ask you who is on the other side of that. And I'm not saying that like you don't know that. I'm not, trying to talk down to you, but I would argue that the people on the other side of that are suffering too.
If not more.
If not more. And so how do we deal with the fact in a very, how do we maintain a kind of morality in our own, how do we not become, in the language of American politics, and this is always like my debate, you know what I mean? Even with, folks on the left in America, how do you not end up doing the thing that we hate, which is Clinton-esque triangulation, like where you're looking away from people that are suffering.
I mean, so I think that this is the single most knotty, painful contradiction that is facing the left at the moment. And the only way I can put it out there, and this is not something I have answers to, it's only something I can frame as the question, is every time we defend a minority who is under attack, be they asylum seekers, be they trans people, be they victims of police violence, could be anybody, we are pulled away from majoritarian economic terrain.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why the right attack those groups is because, one, they believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
It is a sincere expression of their political ideology and worldview. And two, is that they know that every time they do, we stop talking about the thing that we're really, really strong on. And I don't know what you do about that.
What if your terrain is not as strong as you think it is? In other words, like, what if there is, I mean, this is like a dark thing I think about with people. I hope it's not true. What if there's some part of humanity, not the totality of us, but some part of us that just likes to hurt other people?
I think that that's true, but I also think that we are wounded by it. I mean,
Of course we are. Yes, of course.
And, I always think about the one chapter in Algeria Unveiled where Fanon talks to the French torturer in Algeria and explores that kind of psychic violence. I don't think that we can commit acts of violence without ourselves being wounded by it.
I agree.
And I think that that's why we need these stories which make a virtue of that violence or tell us how this victim deserves it. And I think that economic majoritarian terrain, I think when you look at the polling, it's so like, a majority of conservative voters in this country want a wealth tax. Like the people who want stuff, like it's there. It's that I think we've been made to feel, and this is 45 years of neoliberalism thing, that we can't have it. The thing you can have is crackdowns on immigration because we've had nothing but that. Right. Whereas you've been told for decades and decades and decades that taxing millionaires and billionaires is impossible. So you may want it, but it's further away from your grasp than bashing asylum seekers again.
It'll be an easier world and a better world if you're right.
You have to behave as though you are, right?
I don't know because I think I think like the whole thing with trans folks is very instructive for me. The polling that says that this decided the election in America is limited. It's not clear. They blame not just trans folks, they blame, I don't even know how many people there are like this, but some number of trans women who are in sports, like people pass laws in states against this. I am not exaggerating. And then I asked, is this actually happening in your state? And they can't name anybody. You know what I mean? So like that kind of viciousness towards people, again, like I don't think you have to go out and run on this stuff. But when I see, like, look, I got bullied when I was in middle school, right? Like maybe this is the root of my politics. I got bullied when I hate bullies. Yeah. And so when I see people punching people because nobody will stand up for them, or because those people themselves lack the power. Again, it's kind of what brought me to the message, right? Because those people lack I have like an instinct that says, man, fuck that. Like, because I feel like if that was me, you would punch me. Like if I was in that situation, you would do that to me. And so you and I are then now not on the same side. Like, and this is maybe not great, for building comradeship or building, like the kind of broad majoritarian politics, you want. I confess that. But that instinct to me is a kind of cowardice.
You don't think that things have... I wonder if I can put the difference I'm feeling between us like this, because maybe it doesn't matter how bad things are. I have quite a strong faith in the goodness of other people. And I think you've got to strip away a lot of bullshit, but I think you'll find it. And there are all sorts of reasons why I think this. I think that people's aptitude for tolerance is far greater in real life than it is in the abstract. I think
that's true.
Right?
Yes, I think that's true.
I think that, even in the last 15 years, the change of gay marriage has completely changed the social acceptance of same-sex relationships. And then there's also a last thing, and, I always end up quoting my mom at least once in every interview. So this is the bingo card getting marked, which is she was a big part of the anti-apartheid movement in this country, and she got arrested for doing sit-ins and stuff like that. She's very, very proud of it. And she said to me, I did all these things thinking I would never, ever, ever see the fall of apartheid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it fucking happened.
Yeah.
I don't know. Those things give me hope about people.
I think I agree with that. And I think you have to fight like that. I think you have to fight beyond your lifetime. I think you're called to. I may be less convinced of the fundamental good of people. I think people fundamentally have a lot of good in them. But I've told this story 100 times, but going to the Democratic National Convention this year, where Kamala Harris got the nomination, and watching them marshal a litany of freedom fighters at the same time that America was responsible for the fighters that were dropping the bombs on Gaza and shipping the bombs that were dropped on Gaza, I was like, I understand practical politics, but at some point, I feel like there is a way that you can get lost in the we just have to win of it. That is really frightening to me. It's really scary. And the second thing I would say about that is it is worth studying, at least in America, the conservative movement, which has not framed itself in majoritarian ways at all. And yet, how did they end up outlawing abortion in the country? Somehow they did, though. Somehow, or I should say, more specifically, destroying protections for it. That's not a majoritarian position at all. And they loudly said it. Loudly. And I wonder, and here I'm really just wondering, I don't know that this is true, right? You know what I mean? And there's probably some sort of balance in it. But I do think that there is something to be said in standing on a principle that you believe in because it's a principle. And even sometimes people who don't agree with you will respect the fact that you stood on it. I think there is a moral core. I shouldn't say a moral core. There is a vision of the world to the conservative movement in America that is wholly lacking in the Democratic Party, which is a small c conservative movement, in the sense that it believes that things are basically okay in America and you just need to tinker around the edges, but the institutions are fundamentally sound. Whereas the other side believes that it wants to remake the world. Does everybody agree with how that side wants to remake the world? No. And yet somehow they win elections. And I don't know why that is.
I think they're very good at channeling people's anger. I think they're very, very, very good at it. And I think that it is an indictment of a neoliberalism that fails to die, that it keeps fighting as if it's operating in pre-2008, whereas the right understand, you know what, you can both be the representatives of the billionaire class and channel and redirect people's anger that is caused by the billionaire class onto something else. I think they're smart and they know how to do it.
I think that's exactly right. And I think part of that, if I may make my own argument, is the stories we tell. but specifically, I kind of, alluded to this, the stories we tell about the state and state action. One of the things that has become clear to me about America as I've, traveled more is that America tells itself that it is the wealthiest country in the world, but it really isn't. It is the country with the most amount of wealth concentrated amongst some individuals, but we don't build things as a state and as a country. We don't really, and again, this will, now we'll do it on a class level in comparing societies. But I told the story in another interview. I had a mix up with my taxi yesterday after I got in on the train, right? And
Mm.
so I ended up catching the subway to the hotel. What a wonderful experience. You have to understand what it means for an American who believes that the state is really fundamentally there to safeguard people's rights, happiness, resources, however you want to put it, to just get on a train like that. I know that strikes you as a very baseline level.
No. Look, every time I get in the Victoria line on my way to work every morning,
Yeah.
I hold the rail and I go, what a miracle you are.
I cannot emphasize to you how hard that is to do in America and how it is actively being destroyed, specifically in New York City right now. Like people are undermining it and destroying it right now. And I think part of that is to your point about neoliberalism, because I want to make this point very, very explicit. To the extent that the Democratic Party has largely adopted the language of business and private enterprise and billionaires somehow being better at running institutions, which is an insane proposition. Like, that does not stand up to any sort of scrutiny or any, you want government's being run by like a business right now. It's happening right now. You wanted to see what it looked like? You know what I mean? When the public completely cedes itself over to look at America right now. It looks insane. It looks insane, but we have a rhetoric and a story in our head, and it goes back to, Bill Clinton saying the era of big government is over. It goes back to this notion which was crazy, that anybody could run a public school, that we can appoint CEOs. I mean, this literally happened, that the principal or the superintendent of a school system should be called a CEO, that there should be CFOs, that the language.
We've got that too here.
Oh my God, it's terrible.
The academy system.
It is really important that it go away. Like, this notion that somebody like Jack Welch or whoever somehow has something to tell us about how a state should secure the rights and happiness for the most people. It is insane. But that's the Democratic Party position right now. And when you have that, it becomes extremely, difficult to do things on the behalf, collectively of broad groups of people.
I want to talk about Palestine.
Of course.
And I want to talk about the Palestine portion.
This has been really cool, though, because I have no problem talking about Palestine, but this is like one of the few interviews I've done where I've gotten to the broader, we've had the broader conversation.
There's loads of stuff about other bits of the book, which maybe I'm going to loop back round to, because I do actually want to find out.
You're asking great questions.
You know what? Very, very quickly, I need you to settle an argument I'm having with my husband.
Oh, sure. Okay.
And it's really important.
Okay, cool.
Because it's about Shakespeare.
Oh, man. Wow.
Right? My husband takes the view that we only venerate Shakespeare as much as we do because we associate him with, posh people and elitist spaces. I take the view that the big guy had something to say about something which is universal and human, and you get it in these flashes. And you quoted the first murderer from Macbeth, where he's essentially saying, get rich or die trying.
That's exactly what he's saying. Thank you for seeing that. Thank you for seeing that. My God, I don't know how people miss that. It's so obvious. He sounds like a rapper, man. I mean, well, you both could possibly be right. I mean, because...
Oh, come on. Don't sit on the fence.
The argument would be that there are other people who were just as profound, but because of who Shakespeare was. But correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't there a whole class thing with Shakespeare where at the time it wasn't like, high-end entertainment?
It wasn't. So
right.
he was the son of a glover.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Theatre was, basically full of prostitutes and thieves and bear fights.
Yes.
Great time.
Yes.
And while you might write plays as an aristo, the idea that you would put them on in popular theatres and stuff was like, ugh, why would you do that? Because if you're an aristocrat, you'd pass it amongst your friends.
Got it.
So Shakespeare was not considered high class at his time.
And isn't the whole thing about like, he didn't really write it? Isn't there a class element of that too?
Oh, that's bullshit. They think that a son of a glover couldn't have possibly
done it. That's it, right? Yes, it's totally class. Yes, exactly. So, I mean, we have that in America. It's just this notion that literature or great art or profound things come from, it's absurd, come from up here, when it always comes from the street. Always. Because the street is the place that puts you most in conversation with the base elements of life. That is the place where you have to ask, what is this about? There's a reason why you can't imagine American English without Black people.
Oh, yeah.
Like that. And that's why, you know what I mean? It's because the language comes from this, deep, profound place. It is a reason why, the blues is so much the source of, American, music and pop culture, because it comes from this base, sort of place. So no.
And the history of white working class people in the UK loving the music of Motown and soul.
Yeah.
And adapting it into, well, the song stayed the same for Northern Soul, but a very particular kind of dance and centered around clubs like Wigan Casino. Like the love of like Motown was like very much a white working class thing.
Well, I mean, it makes sense because of where it comes from. I mean, it comes from a factory town, right? Like that's literally, that's what Detroit was. And that's what, a number of the artists who, were performing, they were child of, or they were doing it themselves. I think Barry Gordy worked in the Planet, if I'm remembering this right. But, I say that to say that to your question, man, when I read that and I was in 12th grade and I was like, oh my God, this so speaks to me. Like, I know, like, I feel it, to some extent in my bones. And certainly I know people, around me who really, really feel that. And, the notion that this had been done centuries before and that it was still true in my time was like, wow, that is a powerful thing.
It's always such a shame that the little side characters often don't make it to the stage or the film adaptations because you get those moments, No,
I think I think Shakespeare's great, honestly,
Breaking news.
Right. Comes to the UK and says Shakespeare's great.
Shakespeare's great. I also really like cheddar cheese and cups of tea.
No, this is my courageous stand.
Yeah, don't pander to your audience. But I do want to talk about Palestine because it was it's not just what you've written, but then also how it's been received and generated conversations in the American media space. I suppose just very broadly, how did going to Palestine change you as a writer, as a person?
It's impossible to say. It's just so huge. I mean, obviously there was the very specific thing, of seeing what was happening in Palestine very specifically. But, which, I didn't talk about, but I feel like maybe a lot of the people who are going to listen to this will already know. I'll just say that if we take this from an American perspective, we had two systems of segregation, one that was deeply explicit in the Deep South, one that was very real but less explicit in the North and a little bit more complicated. I went to Palestine expecting to see a model of oppression that maybe was closer to the North, and what I found was the South. It is explicit. It's obvious. It's not hard to tell at all. Again, I mean, these are kind of like moral questions for me. If I have a society in which, or state, or an occupation, or whatever you want to call it, and the system says, these roads are for these people, these roads are for that people, these license plates are for these people, these license plates are for that people, this justice system is for this people, this justice system is for that people, which is the situation on the West Bank. If I say within the country itself, I have a system of citizenship, and yet within that system of citizenship, people can discriminate on the basis of housing. Discriminate in housing on the basis of culture, tradition, etc. Well, I mean, that's segregation. Like, I know what that is. You're saying you had a right. You know what I mean? If you say that in order to serve in public office here and be part of this society, you have to affirm the right of this state to exist. And this state is at its core ultimately an apartheid project. And if you'll just give me a little bit of rope to say what I mean by that. Because I want to be very explicit about this. I don't say that just merely as a slur, although it is one. I don't say that just to, append a kind of label on people. I mean that very explicitly. I mean that to say that when you say, I'm going to have a Jewish state, and what a Jewish state means to me is that we must, as a people, comprise 80% of the population, and the minority must remain a minority. It must remain at 20%, or it is not a Jewish state. And this is what is said. I got it documented in the book. This is what is explicitly said. It is a demographic project. What is the non-discriminatory non-violent, non-apartheid way that you enforce a demographic project like that? There isn't one. There isn't one. You know, and I'm sorry I get worked up about this, right? So in Israel itself, you confess that you are pursuing a demographic project on the basis of ethnicity, and you will use the laws, and people can only serve in office who are members of that minority by pledging their allegiance to that project, which seeks to limit themselves, right? You go out to the occupied West Bank, and the segregation is explicit. The water rights, explicit. The roads, explicit. The justice system.
Israel owns the aquifers and the rain from the sky.
It's the water itself, right? Like the water itself. I'm not making this up. Like they will tell you this. They'll tell you. And then you go to Gaza, which pre-October 7th was referred to, I think quite accurately, as the largest open-air jail in the world, where like to fish in the Mediterranean Sea is to risk being shot. Like to have, like if you have cancer, you have to go through a barrage of permitting process, hoping that you get a permit for the right day so that you can get treatment. What I found most interesting about my media tour is that when I came back and told people that, people didn't contest the truth of that. And I mean, they can't, because again, this is the words of the people there. Like this is the words of the Zionists themselves. What they said to me is, yes, but why is that?
Aren't the Palestinians deserving of being treated like that in some way?
And now I'm out. Like I'm out. I'm out. Because like, no, there's nothing they could do that will make Ta-Nehisi Coates say, yes, that is okay. I mean, the metaphor I use all the time is, I am opposed to the death penalty. Let's use your politics that you've outlined right here, right? Let's use what you've outlined right here. You want to see a world where, let me not speak for you. What is the world you want to see? Tell me. When you talk about like these coalitions that you want to build, tell me, what is the world that you see for your brother-in-law who feels very differently about him?
Look,
what do you want for him? What is the world that you want for him?
I want housing, water, healthcare, the right to life for all. I want us to stop poisoning the planet in the interest of shareholder profit. I want to stop the commodification of the gifts of nature, which should be put towards the public good and the planetary good. And I don't want to live in a world where somebody being born into a particular ethnicity or being labeled as a particular race dictates whether or not they live or die or have a life of dignity.
Okay, so I want to focus on like the first few things you said, right? Is there anything in this world that person can say or do to make you feel like that person is not deserving of those things?
No.
Nothing. It's the end of the conversation. There is no what did that person
Arsenal.
do. Support what?
Arsenal.
All right.
Sorry, I corrected myself.
But there's nothing that person could do, right? Nothing. It's just, these are your politics. You have a moral belief. That's how I feel. I have listened, like there's no, but you know, hey, apartheid is okay because, no, there's nothing.
But no one wants to say it like that, do they? No one wants to pin their colours to the mast, apart from actually Israeli politicians themselves who are very happy saying this kind of stuff.
They are very happy saying it.
And the English language press just doesn't want to translate it. They don't want to make it part of the news coverage, which I find.
Do you know in the press in Israel and in the history, this was before October 7th, they will openly say to you, if I was them, I'd do the same thing.
Yeah.
Like they will. Moshe Dayan gives a famous, speech after, one of these, massacres of Israelis. And he says, listen, we have to get into their head. We have to realize that we've been taking their land. Like there is this kind of frankness with which they do the stuff.
Or Jabotinsky, right?
Jabotinsky, who says it clearly. Says it very, look, they are going to resist because we're trying to take something from them.
No colonized people in history.
No colonized people have just let it happen. And Americans, I don't know about here. Maybe it's the same here.
Oh, it's the same here.
Okay. They don't have the guts to say it like that. They don't have the guts to say it like that. But that is what it is.
There was something which I thought, reading that chapter, and I don't know if anyone's asked you this before, but I felt that it was in some ways a bit of a rebuke to what many Afro-pessimist thinkers and writers have said about cross-racial solidarity. Frank Wilderson himself said that drawing any similarity between Black and Palestinian struggles is, in his words, bullshit.
Did he say that?
Yeah, he did.
Did he really say it like that?
He said it's bullshit.
Is that a real quote?
That's a real quote. It's a real quote. It's from before.
Was there something? Now I'm looking for so what did he say that made that okay? Like, what was going? What is the context of that?
So these were comments which I can't remember if they were made in 2014 or 2021. But he suggested that those that people in Gaza would enjoy privileges not shared by the residents of Ferguson.
In America?
Yeah,
I mean, if they were brought to America, yes, that's true. But
I mean, he said in Gaza. As I told a friend of mine, yeah, we're going to help you get rid of Israel, but the moment that you set your shit, you set up your shit, we're going to be right there to jack you up because anti-blackness is as important and necessary to the formation of Arab psychic life as it is to the formation of Jewish psychic life.
Okay, all right, that's a little better. I will say this, and I don't have. Go ahead. Sorry,
basically we have to remember this so that we don't fall into a sort of genuine bonding with people who are really primarily using Black energy to catalyze and energize their struggle.
Right. Well, you had me for a second and then I went back out.
They had us in the first half, can't lie.
Yeah. All right, so let's just do it. The first half of that, certainly any number of, my comrades, my Palestinian and my Arab comrades have been very clear about how anti-Blackness works in those communities. And that's a real thing. Anti-Blackness is global. You know what I mean? But again, I could have gone to the West Bank and seen a Ku Klux Klan march and I would have told you apartheid's wrong. Like those two, like they don't, the reason why I wanted to draw you out on what you were saying before is it's like, I believe the same thing about America. Like I, believe that, white supremacy is at the core of its institutions. I believe you can't understand America without that, I don't believe that the people in West Virginia who are suffering because they voted for Trump are getting what they deserved. Because I don't believe anybody deserves this. I reject it. I completely, in other words, what I'm saying is I reject a quid pro quo politics. I don't love the notion of I have your back.
It's a transaction.
Yes, because you'll have mine. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, what if there was profound anti-Blackness on the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and in Gaza? Apartheid's wrong, man.
But I suppose on the part about, drawing that similarity between, the Black experience and Palestinian experience is bullshit. To be fair, I haven't been able to find what Frank Wilderson has had to say after October the 7th. So I don't know if his thinking has changed. I don't know if it's shifted.
I think so I haven't heard it in context, so I don't know. And so I don't want to go too far. At its highest, I guess maybe there is some version of this that there is a kind of moral valence that comes from associating the Black American struggle with other struggles that maybe he is leery of. But for me, when I use these words like Jim Crow and apartheid, I am telling you that to take your words, in a very material way, I am saying this is what it is. I'm not saying it's like this. In other words, I am not saying it is as morally bad as Jim Crow, although it is, or maybe worse, right? I am saying that the systems are reminiscent of each other. The systems of control are reminiscent of each other, okay? And that has nothing to do with how much anti-Black racism there is in Palestine or anti-Arab racism there is among Black Americans. You see what I'm saying? Because I think we then fall into the trap of other people, right? Where it's like your hyper morality or moral goodness is some sort of determiner for whether you should suffer or not. And I reject that. I reject it. I can't go so far as to say that, it is a repudiation of, Afro-pessimism or Afro-pessimist thinkers, just because I don't know it well enough.
Mhm.
You see what I'm saying? Like, I just don't, I'm not that as familiarized with it,
Mhm.
and I haven't read those enough to say that. But I do say that the thing that I think has repeatedly come across in our conversation is like this search for some sort of moral core for your politics, something that is unmovable, something that is, uncompromising, something that does not depend on how other people treat you or say about you or say about each other. In the wake of October 7th, there was this very popular notion among some people of Jewish background, that Black folks were not sufficiently, I don't know what we should have done. I don't know what they wanted from us. I don't know what these people wanted from us. But among some folks of Jewish background, there was this sense that we were not, I guess, sufficiently outraged by October 7th, right?
Something people said in this country was we started protesting outside the Israeli embassy too soon after the bomb started falling on Gaza.
Yeah, it's deeper than that, though, because this isn't even among people who were protesting. This is among people, maybe you weren't loud enough on your social media.
No.
Like if you're on Instagram.
What did you think Yahya Sinwar was going to do after reading my Twitter account? He's like, oh, guys, hold off.
Right,
hold off Operation Al-Aqsa flood.
Right. No, what it is that people want to feel. Like they want to feel something, right? And they feel, and I'm not on social, so I don't have I'm not the greatest person on this, but they want to feel some sort of thing that you have their back. And the argument was made that, well, we as a people supported you during the civil rights movement. Why aren't you not supporting us right now? And like my reply to that has always been, yes, it's true disproportionately. If you looked at the folks who were, the white people, in the South who were putting their bodies on the line, yes, there was a disproportionate number of Jewish Americans who were doing that. We salute them for it. If they were here today, I think what they would say to you is, we did not do it under the stipulation that you would later have my back.
There wasn't an IOU.
It wasn't an thank you very much. It wasn't an IOU. It wasn't, remember me, I'm going to need a favor someday. It was, this is wrong. This is wrong. And I guess I kind of reject IOU politics. And I reject it, you know what I mean, at that moment, when that was going on. And I reject it here with Palestine. What happens in this world, with a truly free Palestine and truly free Palestinians and how they regard us? Well, I hope that is a world where white supremacy is less safe. Okay? And I think it necessarily has to be, right? But that is not the root of why I had to come back and say what I said. I couldn't sleep at night. I couldn't live with myself.
Part of it being a parent. You see the world and those kids are being forced to live in.
Yeah, but I think it's being bullied when I was a kid. I do.
Yeah.
I do. I think it's having a very visceral experience of being under somebody else's thumb and being completely at their mercy. And I think a lot of my personal politics and a lot of my broader public politics, kind of come down to that.
There was a tweet that I read, which, seeing as you're not on social media, maybe you didn't see, which is after the publication of the message, Ta-Nehisi Coates got liberals burning their copy of Between the World and Me like it's the LeBron Cavs jersey. For UK audiences, that's like Sol Campbell's Arsenal shirt. Were you surprised by the response that you got, not from the American right, which is, but from the American center left?
I'm not sure why I would be, but I want to take this moment to clarify something about like who I am politically. Sometimes I can control what I write, right? And I can control who I am as a person and things about me, right? I have very little control over how that's received. Between the World and Me sold a lot of books. The Case for Reparations was extremely popular. I've sold a lot of books over the course of my career. I'm very happy about that. If you had told me that was going to happen when I first started publishing books in 2008, I'd be shocked. This wasn't a plan. Like, it wasn't like, I'll write the thing that white liberals love and they'll buy a lot of copies of my book. You know what I mean? And I will proceed. Like, I think people think like it was a dastardly sort of, like I conceived this in a lab somewhere. How do I write right? If only, you know, I mean, if I could be that smart, I would ask for other things. You know what I mean? But I don't know why. I don't know why Between the World and Me was received the way it was. I don't know why. I know why I have access to things that Palestinians don't. I do know that. That I can, you know, that's very clear, right? But I don't know why specifically the books I write reach the kind of quarters that they reach, and that people, you know, on a certain level feel like they have to deal with them in a way that they don't have to deal with other things. I can only tell you what I'm doing. And what I am doing is putting as much stress as possible on every sentence I have. The writing is extremely important to me.
You can tell. You can really tell in reading
it. Well, that's good. That's good. And I think I have this optimistic, perhaps mistaken view that people in this world have all sorts of other things they could be doing. They could be on their smartphone. They could be playing their video games. They could be looking at their socials, talking to their friends, making love, eating out. They have so many better things to do than read your books. And the least you can do in this world where we are competing for time is write as hard as you can. And I try to do that. And my editor edits as hard as, that's the part of it I can control. Now, what happens after it gets out in the world, you know, it's kind of not up to me. And so what that means is I don't have a who will get angry with me, you know, sort of perspective on what I write. You know, when I write, I
sometimes definitely have a bit of a like, this is going to boil some piss. And I enjoy that part a little bit.
I mean, I know it. Like, I know it just because I know what the politics are. Like, I knew, like, what I was writing about Palestine, would, like, people would be upset about it. I knew that. But it doesn't really factor into what I do and why I do it. It's like, writing is deeply emotional for me. You know, I was scarred by what I saw. I came home, like, when I talk about dreaming about it, I'm not lying. I really was. It was a deeply... I mean, some of this, like, they have footage of this, actually. You know, PalFest has put some of the footage of it out. Like, it was really happening. Like, this was this wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go see this and, well, I mean, I should say, I knew I wanted to write about it because of the case for reparations. I did know that. But in terms of what you got, I would argue that what you got could only come out of a real, genuine, emotional experience.
I mean, do you have any ideas why there are significant number of American liberals who are more comfortable with you when you're writing about racial injustice in America, and they're more comfortable with that than you writing about what's happening in Palestine?
This is my challenge for you. I think it's because it breaks the political consensus and what they would call the majoritarian politics in America. It presents an enormous political challenge for them.
But no, hang on. Majoritarian doesn't necessarily mean bipartisan.
Yeah, I know, but I would say even that. I would say
Really?
yes. I would say now that's increasingly not true. I want to be clear about that. That's increased. Like it's pretty clear the polls have moved within the I'm putting the Republican Party aside. I'm talking about within the Democratic Party. The consensus was for a long time greater sympathy for Israel than it was for Palestinians and Palestine. That was the majority feeling. And that has recently changed. That has changed because of the protests. That's changed because the long, long struggle of Palestinian activists and thinkers that they've waged. But that's a recent phenomenon. And so the politics of party officials have not yet caught up with where the masses are right now. But for a long time, that was not the case.
That's interesting because I think the history of public opinion on Israel and Palestine is complicated and it's weird. And I think that particularly after the war on terror, things that were once common sense and sayable about Israel suddenly became unsayable.
I think those things were long unsayable in America. And I think, to what you're saying right now, it's not just Israel. It is that there is a level of anti-Arab racism that was always there too. So some of that is about Israel, some of it's not. Some of it is just about the, like the Arnold Schwarzenegger films where, the Arab is always the villain and the Muslims want to blow us up and they're always high. Like that's a thing that was there. Israel's part of that, but it's not the whole of it that was already
We had that
there.
one Rambo where the Mujahideen were the good guys and then they never let us make a movie like that again. Not after how that one turned out.
And so there's there is a broad well of just hostility, you know what I mean? That was already there, that was activated. And it gets naughty because some of that is even racial itself, because maybe not at this point in history, but for much of America's history, I mean, who were the Muslims in America? They were Black people. You know, I mean, Islam has been in America since the first enslaved people came over. You know what I mean? Some of them, you know, literate in Arabic. And so like, that's been the nexus point also, in addition to that, you know, for America's conversation with Islam.
Does that explain the centrality of Israel and the defense of Zionism in American politics? I mean, just to talk about what's happening right now in terms of Mahmoud Khalil, a Columbia student who was arrested by immigration enforcement with the help of Columbia University, others who've been part of the pro-Palestinian movement, who've been subject to student visas being revoked, being taken up by ICE. It's one thing for America to say, all right, we are going to give diplomatic cover to this project. We're going to send billions and billions of dollars in military aid. That is coherent with American foreign policy and what it thinks of Israel as being, right? I don't think it's good. It's coherent. Yeah. For America to say, we will become an extension of, you know, Shin Bet on our own soil is a different thing. I mean, I know I'm asking you to think in real time, but
wasn't it inevitable? I think it was inevitable, and I still reject that our policy has been Israelized. If you accept that to some extent, and I'm still working through this, but that there is American colonial interest in Israel, and I think at the point where you start talking about the bombs, the armed forces, the support being that serious and that deep, the relation, I mean, we say it ourselves, there's a special relationship between the two. Okay, what is the nature of that special relationship? Let's just take their language, the special relationship. You have a special relationship with Israel that you have with no other country. I would say then maybe some of the policies that are being practiced over there, you are responsible for in a different way. And that it is natural that you cannot segregate yourself off and have, you know, some sort of situations where those policies do not ultimately come home and be practiced on the, you know, the quote unquote homeland in the metropole. I mean, I just feel like that is a...
You think it's a boomerang effect?
No, I think it's like, I just think it's hard to do. I mean, it's something that you said earlier where like, if you do something, you're kind of poisoned by it. And how do you only, you know, maintain it over there? You know, again, I mean, I hate to keep bringing this back to the Black struggle, but there is a level of pain that is now being inflicted on white people under Donald Trump that usually white supremacists were pretty good about guarding other white people against. That's not happening right now. It's a lot of white people that are going to die and are dying and are going to suffer, even as the root of this is white supremacy. Well, it's a similar thing here. And I guess this is like why, you know, I feel very strongly beyond the moral piece of this. Listen, they're saying that they're only doing that to people with green cards and student visas. People with citizens should not feel safe. You know, if the charge is he aided and abetted terrorism, why wouldn't they eventually make that case against citizens too? You know? And so there's a kind of inevitability of it. You know what I mean? That just feels like, I mean, it's depressing and upsetting, but I mean, it feels like there's a natural following to it. And just to, you know, go back to, you know, the Democratic Party on this, I do think one of the hopeful things, using your word again, is there is an emerging majority among self-identified Democrats that are horrified by Gaza and do feel more sympathy to Palestinians and Palestine than, you know, my parents' generation, than when I was a kid. I think that's a good and hopeful thing.
I mean, something that struck me, I was watching your interview with Jon Stewart, and it was interesting to me that when he was talking about Israel and Palestine, he said, well, look, of course, the starting point is we want to safe and secure Israel, and we want to safe and secure Palestine. After that, it's just strategy. And maybe it's because I'm Bengali, but I was like, hang on, why isn't partition itself being up for discussion? And from your experiences in the West Bank, from thinking about Palestine, thinking about Israel for a long time, do you think that a two-state solution is possible, that it's just? And what do you think about, thinkers such as like Avi Shlaim, who say, well, look, the only just outcome is one state with democratic rights for all, but that means giving up Jewish majoritarianism?
I think my position on this has been that I'm uncomfortable dictating a just outcome for Palestinians.
You're American. It's a habit. Come on, embrace it.
I mean, because part of being American is that you are part of a state that has basically denied them their voice, and so I kind of don't want to do that. I do want to say that my politics cannot support states that discriminate on the basis of ethnicity. That's just a red line. We all have to have them, right? Like, that's a core for me. And so, like, I don't know what the shape and outlines of a Palestinian state would be. I don't know if it's one state or two. I don't know how, you know what I mean? I know that there's a rigorous debate about that, and I think that should be a Palestinian voice first debate, and so what Ta-Nehisi thinks about that is less important. What I can speak to, though, right now is the fact that what Israel has done in saying that, in defining a Jewish state demographically, right? Because maybe there are other ways to do that. You know what I mean? Like, maybe there's, we have a certain, I don't know how you would say this now, but I mean, maybe you still could. Maybe to
we're
you,
a Christian country.
Exactly.
But
there you go. There you go.
Right.
Like, so people, now you're getting what I'm saying. In America, people will say, well, our justice system has Judeo-Christian roots. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's not. I have no idea. You know what I mean?
You're not even about it like that. Your president isn't the head of any church. Our head of state.
Wow.
Like, I mean, come on, our head of state is the Supreme Governor of the Church of
That's
England.
That's a great point. But that has, what you would say to me is that has no demographic manifestation.
No, it has no demographic.
Right. So, okay. So if that were the case, you know what I mean? Like, if that's what you mean by a Jewish state, okay. You know what I mean? Okay. Like, I don't really have a quibble with that. But if what you mean is we must be a demographic, I'm out. I am out. I oppose that because that is the logic that my own people suffered under. And even if they didn't, I just think it's wrong. I just think it's straight up wrong, I've
got one last question for you before I let you out to experience
the
miracle
finish
of the
though?
tube.
Can I go back to this thing you asked?
Yeah, of course.
About like these white liberals.
Yeah.
Because I get asked all the time. I just want to just button one thing up. I think one of the things about being a public figure and being a private figure is people begin to think that the people who buy your books are your friends, and some of them are. Some of them. I certainly have white friends, right? But because you're quote unquote, I don't want to say this in a non-condescending way.
Just be condescending.
No, I don't want to, because I don't think anybody deserves that. Like that is one thing about me. No matter, like, I just don't think, like, whatever your politics, that you deserve it, right? But what I will say is, because you're, supports Black Lives Matter, supports, I don't know, has the rainbow sign, in there, has all the signposts of equality and DEI or whatever, however you think of, normie democratic politics. I can't even do that. Black squares, whatever. Because that person buys between the world and me, that doesn't make me that person. I want them to buy between the world and me. And I want them to buy the message. I want them to read it. You know what I mean? And I don't apologize for them buying it or reading it. Because I think, don't we want more people? You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, don't we want more people? I do. But what people receive from me is not an authority on what I then decide to transmit. Whether a certain kind of person will be upset about what I say about Palestine is wholly irrelevant from whether I should write about Palestine. Those two things, like, any writer who does that, as far as I'm concerned, is no longer a writer. You're out.
They're shill.
You are shilling. you're shilling. You're doing something else, and you have no respect for your audience, and you have no respect, you know what I mean, for like your readers. I wrote this the way I wrote it out of respect for all of the people that bought Between the World and Me. I say it because I respect them as readers and respect them as human beings. And my job is not to clap for them and tell them everything is right in their lives. My job is to challenge them. Like I'm challenged when I read things. Like I'm pushed, right? You know what I mean? You didn't come into this interview saying, Ta-Nehisi, you're the greatest writer ever, and I agree with all of your policies. No, you have differences that you want to hash out with me, right? I take that as a sign of respect.
Dialectics comedy.
Yes, yes. But I take that as respect from you. You understand what I'm saying? Because that is how, you know what I mean, I was raised. That, you know, goes back to me and my dad and my mom, you know, being a kid and us having debate and fight, you know, about things. That's how I feel about my broader readership, no matter who they are. You know, no matter how, you know, white, liberal, normie, whatever they are, I do respect them. I do respect them as readers. And out of respect, it is my job to challenge them. You know, as I want them to challenge me, as I want anybody to challenge me.
I suppose my last question, you know, we're having this conversation in 2025, which is 100 years since the birth and 60 years since the murder of Malcolm X. In Between the World and Me, Malcolm features very prominently.
Yeah.
I know this is a terrible question to ask somebody, but what do you imagine he might make of our present moment?
There's just no way to say that.
I mean, do you think maybe your journey of beginning in America and traveling the world and going to Palestine, it mimics the arc of Malcolm's life a little bit?
Do you know he went to Gaza?
No.
I didn't find this out and then like wrote about it. Like apparently he wrote about it's crazy. And I didn't find this out until much later. Actually after the message had been published. Yes, but I think that's because Malcolm X's journey itself mirrors a lot of other Black folks. Part of our problem is we are American, and so as Americans, we're very provincial. You know, we think
you should hear the way other countries talk about you behind your back.
I mean, it's probably all true. It's probably, I mean, being outside and watching it, it's a lot of it's probably all correct. They certainly know us better than we know them. You know, and so, but when you're Black and you're in that, it's a very peculiar place because you have the provincialism of America, but you're not in America. So it's this awkward sort of, you know, thing. You know, I know one of the questions that people had about, you know, some of my earlier work is like, why is it not more internationalist? Why does it not have this big? Well, I hadn't been anywhere. I hadn't seen anything. Like, you know, again, going back to this thing about respecting people, I can't just kind of echo the chants. I have to have seen things and then, you know, incorporate them into, you know, my politics directly. And so I think that's true for a lot of us. I just think that's true. And so Malcolm is obviously the hyper example of that. But we have our American provincialism, and sometimes even our political analysis, not sometimes, all the time, it reflects that. And then you kind of, like the Nation of Islam and all of its, you know, mythology about white people makes sense to a guy who had Malcolm X's life. You know? And then he has these questions, you know, innately, like just kind of watching things. I actually think his first trip out of the country into the Middle East happened while he was still in the nation, if I'm remembering that right. You know, and then he has another one afterwards. And I think it's more complicated than it is in the autobiography. But nonetheless, these questions sort of arise, you know, and this broader thinking about the world arises out of that. But it's very hard to have that opening without having the experiences, like to have a genuine opening, you know, not just kind of parroting what other people are saying, but a genuine opening when you haven't seen much. And the unfortunate part of being Black in America is, yes, we are citizens of the wealthiest country in the world that exports, you know, all of this bad stuff to the world. And there's some privilege in that, right? But we also kind of don't know because we haven't seen it, you know?
Yeah, I know. And that's why I'm trying to get my partners to go on holiday with me all the time.
Yeah, to see.
Well, I was actually going to say to sip caipirinhas, but, you know. Ta-Nehisi Coates, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was great. Thank you. You asked awesome questions.